The red and blue lights flickered in my rearview mirror, but they weren't the steady pulse of a police cruiser. They were cheap, flickering strobes, the kind you'd see at a kid's birthday party, duct taped to the roof of a cherry-red golf cart. I squinted, half expecting a prank, but the man behind the wheel was deadly serious. He wore a knockoff security uniform, complete with a shiny badge that looked like it came from a costume shop. In one hand, he waved a clipboard like it was a court order. "Pull over immediately," he bellowed, his voice cracking with authority he didn't have. "You're in violation of HOA Code 9B. I was Sheriff Tom Hargrove, Clark County's top lawman, but that Tuesday afternoon, I wasn't dressed for the part. Cargo shorts, a faded Springsteen t-shirt, and a pair of scuffed sneakers made me look like any other suburban dad on his day off. I'd been craving a quiet drive, maybe a stop for an iced coffee, when this clown rolled up like he was starring in a low-budget action flick. I chuckled, but the laughter died when I saw him reach for a pair of zip ties dangling from his belt. This wasn't a joke. This guy thought he could arrest me. I eased my old Ford pickup to the curb, right next to a fire hydrant. Another HOA sin, I'm sure. The man, mid-40s, with cargo pants and sunglasses perched on his sweaty forehead, strutted up to my window. "Do you know why I pulled you over?" he asked, his voice dropping into a bad impersonation of a TV cop. "Because your ego's writing checks your golf cart can't cash?" I shot back, unable to resist. He didn't flinch. Instead, he tapped a laminated card clipped to his badge. "I'm Officer Dale, Maple Grove Homeowners Authority. Your truck's got excessive mud on the fender, and your tailgate's got a non-compliant sticker. I'll need your license, HOA compliance papers, and a record of your lawn maintenance for the past 90 days. I stared at him, dumbfounded. "You're trying to ticket me for mud?" "Your sarcasm isn't helping, sir," he snapped. "This is a serious violation of community standards." I could have kept playing along, but the zip ties changed the game. This wasn't just some overzealous neighbor. This was a power trip with a pulse. I reached into my glove box, pulled out my leather badge holder, and flipped it open. The gold sheriff's star gleamed in the sunlight. "You just tried to detain the county sheriff, buddy," I said, letting a grin creep across my face. "Big mistake." The color drained from his face faster than a busted hose. His mouth opened, closed, then opened again, like a fish gasping for air. Before I could say another word, he spun on his heel, sprinted back to his golf cart, and peeled out at a blistering 10 miles an hour. I could have chased him, but something told me this wasn't the end. The uniform was cheap, sure, but the patches were too detailed, the radio on his shoulder too real. This wasn't a one-man show. It was something bigger. Back home, I pulled the dash cam footage from my truck. The insignia on his chest read Maple Grove Authority, not Association. That one-word authority set my nerves on edge. I'd dealt with HOAs before, petty tyrants obsessed with lawn height and mailbox colors, but this felt different. Organized. Deliberate. Later that night, my phone lit up with voicemails from residents. An old widow claimed she'd been fined $600 for too many birdhouses. A young dad said his fence was confiscated for being half an inch too tall. A woman swore someone swapped her garden hose for an approved one and slapped her with a $200 compliance fee. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the pieces clicking together. A fake cop tried to pull me over, and now my neighbors were reporting gnome raids and hose heists. This wasn't just an overzealous HOA. It was a machine, and I was about to find out how deep its gears went. The next morning, a sharp knock on my door broke the silence. Through the peephole, I saw a kid in a neon vest, barely old enough to drive, tapping a tablet like he was issuing a death sentence. He left a slip on my doorknob and vanished. The note read, "Non-compliant mailbox height. $150 fine. Code 4.1C. I crumpled it and tossed it in the trash. I hadn't moved to Maple Grove to be policed by clipboard warriors. I was the law here, and it was time to remind them of that. I started digging. The HOA's rulebook, a 200-page monstrosity, didn't mention Code 4.1C or anything about mud on fenders. But it did reference a shadowy compliance division with powers to enforce visible standards. That phrase stuck with me. Visible standards. It sounded like a blank check for control. I decided to go straight to the source, the HOA's weekly board meeting at the community clubhouse. I showed up in glasses and a polo shirt, my badge tucked in my pocket. The room smelled like bleach and resentment. Rows of folding chairs faced a table where the board sat like judges at a witch trial. The president, a woman named Evelyn Carter, greeted everyone with a smile that could curdle milk. Residents shuffled in, heads down, clutching complaint forms. One woman whispered to me about a $300 fine for overly festive Christmas lights. Her crime? 3 reads instead of 2. The meeting dragged on, a parade of grievances met with canned responses about community harmony. Then it happened. A man complained about 4 citations in a week, and Evelyn leaned into the mic. "We'll escalate that to code 88B, she said, her voice smooth as glass. I scribbled it down. Code 88B wasn't in the rulebook. After the meeting, I lingered, pretending to study a flyer about recycling. 2 board members whispered about Director Y and full compliance measures. My gut told me I'd just scratched the surface of something ugly. Back at the station, I ran a quiet check. One board member, Clara Vaughn, had been linked to a missing persons report last year. The case was closed in 48 hours, marked relocated. No address, no follow-up. Too clean. I needed an insider. So, I called Maggie, a former HOA treasurer who'd quit under mysterious circumstances. We met at a greasy diner, her eyes darting to the door every few seconds. When I mentioned code 88B and Director Y, she froze. "You weren't supposed to hear that," she whispered. "It's not in the public rules. It's internal. Code 88B means they've marked someone as a problem. They don't just fine you. They remove you." Maggie's words hung in the air like smoke, thick and choking. "Remove you," I repeated, leaning across the diner table. The smell of burnt coffee and bacon grease couldn't mask the tension in her voice. "They don't kill people, if that's what you're thinking," she said, her eyes still flicking toward the door. "But they make you wish you'd never moved here. They sabotage your job, your bank account, your reputation. If you push back too hard, they make you disappear. Not in a body bag, just gone. New town, new life, no questions asked." She slid a napkin across the table, her handwriting shaky. Code 88B, neutralization protocol. I took a sip of my coffee, letting it burn my throat to keep me sharp. "And Director Y? Who's that?" Maggie shook her head. "No one knows. Orders come through encrypted emails, always signed with a seal of tree and a set of scales. It's not official, but it's everywhere. Whoever Director Y is, they're not just running the HOA. They're running the whole damn show." I drove home that night, my mind racing. Tiny details I'd ignored before started to stand out. The decorative street lamps I'd always thought were quaintsome had small, blinking lights that didn't match the others. Unmarked white vans idled at the end of cul-de-sacs, engines humming like they were waiting for a signal. On one street, I saw a woman in an HOA vest scolding a guy for planting unapproved roses. He looked like he wanted to argue but just nodded, defeated, as she handed him a citation. Back at my house, I sat in the dark, blinds drawn, replaying the day. Maggie's flash drive, which she'd slipped me before leaving the diner, was burning a hole in my pocket. I plugged it into my laptop, half expecting it to be empty. Instead, it was a goldmine: patrol schedules, expense reports, even memos marked midnight plans. One file caught my eye: a draft to expand the HOA's authority to nearby neighborhoods, calling it unified living. It wasn't just about lawns anymore. They wanted to police personal conduct, political signs, even internet activity. This wasn't an HOA. It was a cult with better landscaping. The next morning, I woke to the sound of engines outside. Not cars, golf carts. 4 of them, parked across from my house in a neat row, their fake emergency lights spinning lazily. 8 HOA officers stepped out, moving like they'd rehearsed it. One snapped photos of my mailbox. Another measured my grass with a ruler, muttering about egregious violations. A third stood by my driveway, clipboard in hand, writing furiously. I stepped onto my porch, still in my flannel pajama pants and sheriff's department t-shirt, and leaned against the railing. "You fellas starting a gardening club, or just here to admire my curb appeal?" I called out. The leader, a tall guy with aviators too small for his face, gave a mock salute. "Scheduled Tier 2 inspection, sir. HOA protocol." "Funny," I said, crossing my arms. "I don't recall signing up for your little parade. And last I checked, you need permission to snoop on private property." He smirked, unfazed. Bylaws, Section 14. Properties facing common roads are subject to visible inspection. With or without your cooperation, Sheriff. They climbed back into their carts and rolled off, leaving me with a knot in my gut. This wasn't just harassment. It was a test. I needed to hit back, but I had to be smart. So I set a trap. The next day, I turned my front yard into an HOA nightmare. I spray-painted my mailbox neon orange, left my trash bins out a week early, and planted a plastic flamingo with a cowboy hat. For the grand finale, I set up a miniature disco scene 6 garden gnomes around a tiny mirror ball, complete with battery-powered strobe lights. Then I waited, my phone rigged to stream to a secure cloud server. They took the bait. By dusk, 5 golf carts screeched to a halt in front of my house. 10 officers, all in matching uniforms, spilled out, body cameras clipped to their chests. "Step outside, sir," one barked through a megaphone. "You're in violation of multiple ordinances." I strolled onto the porch, hands in my pockets. Which one? The flamingo or the gnome rave? "This isn't a joke," the leader snapped, pulling zip ties from his belt. That was my cue. I tapped my phone, and the hidden cameras I'd set up went live, broadcasting every word to my private channel, mirrored to the county prosecutor's office. "You're attempting to detain a private citizen on private property using fake authority," I said, loud and clear. "That's 2 felonies and a civil lawsuit waiting to happen." The leader froze, his confidence cracking. "You're bluffing," he muttered, but his eyes darted to my window, where my sheriff's badge and service pistol sat in plain view. I stepped aside. "Test me." They backed off, climbing into their carts without another word. I poured myself a whiskey, not to celebrate, but to steady my nerves. This was a win, but it was only the first round. That night, my doorbell rang at 11:58 p.m. The camera feed showed nothing, just an envelope on the porch. Inside was a typed note. "No signature. Back off, Sheriff. This isn't your fight." I stared at it, the words sinking in. They were wrong. This was exactly my fight. The next day, I started digging deeper. Town council records showed 4 of the 7 HOA board members were appointed during closed-door sessions, all backed by one person. Mayor Lillian Prescott, my mother-in-law. The woman who'd once criticized my tie at a family barbecue had handpicked the people now threatening me. It wasn't just favoritism, it was a power play. I wanted to believe she was clueless, caught up in a scheme she didn't understand, but the evidence was piling up. The uniforms, the cameras, the bunker Maggie had mentioned, it all pointed to someone with real influence. I called an old friend, Jake, a cybersecurity guy who owed me for bailing him out of a bar brawl years ago. We met behind the library, him in a hoodie like he was auditioning for a hacker movie. I handed him Maggie's flash drive and asked him to trace the Director Y memos. Within 24 hours, he had a hit. Every encrypted message routed through a private server tied to a shell company headquartered in City Hall. The billing address? Lillian's discretionary fund. Director Y was Mayor Lillian Prescott. My stomach churned. This wasn't just a case anymore. It was personal, and personal gets messy. That evening, I got an invite to a special dinner for local officials, hosted by Lillian herself. The timing was too perfect. Either she knew I was closing in, or she was about to make her move. I showed up in full uniform, not to flex, but to remind her I wasn't backing down. The community center was decked out like a wedding reception, white tablecloths, string lights, the works. Lillian stood in the center, radiant in pale blue, holding a wine glass like a scepter. When she saw me, her smile was all teeth, cold as a January morning. "Tom," she said, arms wide like we were old pals. "You look purposeful." "Busy week," I said, holding her gaze. "Don't I know it?" she replied, gesturing to the buffet. I didn't move. "We need to talk, Lillian. About what you've built. About the notes on my porch." Her smile didn't waver. "Why don't we step outside?" she said, nodding toward the door. We walked into the night, far enough from the party to speak freely, but close enough for witnesses if she tried something crazy, like shoving me into a rosebush. "You're clever, Tom," she said, folding her arms. "And predictable." "So it's you," I said, my voice low. "Director Y." She didn't deny it. "What did you expect? Some shadowy figure pulling strings? This town needs order, and I gave it that. With cameras in people's homes? With fake cops and zip ties?" I snapped. "With discipline," she corrected. Crime's down. Property values are up. People feel safe because they know there are rules. Rules you enforce with felonies, I said, stepping closer. You've broken the law, Lillian. So have you, I'm sure, she shot back. But your badge lets you call it discretion. If you take me down, this town burns. You don't want to light that match. She brushed past me, back to the party, leaving me in the dark with the weight of her words. She was right about one thing. Taking her down would be a war. But I wasn't about to let her win. Lillian's words echoed in my head as I stood alone in the cool night air, the faint hum of the dinner party drifting through the community center doors. She'd thrown down the gauntlet, daring me to take her on, warning that the town would crumble if I did. Maybe she was right. Maple Grove loved her. She was the mayor who'd brought food trucks to the park, speed bumps to the school zone, and a shiny new gazebo to the square. To them, she was order, safety, the friendly face at every ribbon cutting. But I'd seen the rot beneath her charm, and I wasn't about to let it spread. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my office, lights off, replaying the HOA patrol footage on my laptop. Enforcers barking orders, residents cowering over minor infractions, cameras hidden in places no one should be watching. Lillian's shadow loomed over it all, calm and untouchable. I had evidence: Maggie's flash drive, the bunker files, the server traces, but evidence alone wouldn't break her spell. I needed to show the town who she really was, and for that, I needed help. The next morning, I made a call I hadn't made in years. Frank Bulldog Russo was a former deputy who'd been kicked off the force for what the brass called creative problem solving. He wasn't dirty, just impatient with red tape, the kind of guy who'd rather break a door down than wait for a warrant. These days, he ran a rib joint on the edge of town, but I knew his heart was still in the fight, especially after the HOA bankrupted him over an unapproved deck. I found him behind his smoker, the air thick with hickory and defiance. "Tell me you're finally taking these lawn fascists down," Frank said, tossing me a plate of brisket. "Past ready," I said, cutting to the chase. "I need a team. Smart, fast, maybe a little reckless." He grinned, wiping sauce off his hands. "You're preaching to the choir, Sheriff." By noon, we had a crew. I called them the Neighborhood Guardians, but Frank dubbed us Operation Free Grove, and it stuck. There was Ruth, a retired librarian who'd been banned from HOA meetings for disruptive questioning. Eddie, a tinkerer with a garage full of drones and a grudge against the HOA for finding his solar panels. Marcus, a mechanic who'd built a custom lawnmower that could double as a tank. And a handful of teenagers, eager for chaos in exchange for free wings and a pass on curfew violations. We set up shop at Maggie's house that night, her living room transformed into a war room. Maps pinned to the walls, laptops humming, pizza boxes stacked in the corner. Everyone had a role. Eddie hacked the HOA's patrol schedules, revealing their routes down to the minute. Marcus rigged a couple of borrowed golf carts with smoke canisters and tire spikes. Ruth baked brownies spiked with ghost pepper sauce, labeled peace offerings for the enforcers. It was war, but with a suburban twist: tactical, absurd, and just a little unhinged. The plan was simple: provoke the HOA into overreacting, catch them in the act, and expose them live to the town. Then hit them with legal action when the dust settled. At dawn, we launched Phase 1. I planted a dozen gnomes in my yard, each holding a tiny protest sign. HOA equals tyranny. Ruth parked her ancient RV on Lillian's pristine lawn, firing up a charcoal grill in defiance of the open flame ban. Eddie sent a drone skyward, trailing a banner that read, "Maple Grove deserves freedom." Within 15 minutes, the HOA's golf carts swarmed the streets, lights flashing, megaphones blaring, citations flying like confetti. Phase 2 was escalation. Frank and Marcus hooked up a sound system in my backyard, blasting a loop of non-compliant noises: barking dogs, jackhammers, and a kazoo cover of Sweet Caroline. The enforcers lost it, shouting at neighbors, trying to seize wind chimes and garden flags. That's when I made my move. I rolled up to the HOA office in my cruiser, a search warrant in hand, signed by Judge Harlan, an old friend who'd seen the footage and didn't need convincing. The office was a ghost town, but the back door hid a steel-reinforced bunker, just like Maggie had described. Eddie's drone had mapped the entrance, and Jake's decryption cracked the biometric lock. Inside, We found a nerve center straight out of a spy movie server's humming, screens showing live feeds from every corner of Maple Grove. One displayed a couple bickering in their kitchen. Another zoomed in on a kid sneaking a cigarette behind a shed. These weren't Ring cameras. They were hidden, planted during mandatory security upgrades the HOA had pushed last year. My name flashed on a monitor, marked in red, imminent threat. Neutralize. I called the state troopers. Send everyone, I said. Now. We arrested 9 enforcers on the spot, charges ranging from illegal surveillance to impersonating law enforcement. Most didn't fight. One guy, barely 25, muttered, "I'm just glad I don't have to measure fences anymore." But Lillian was nowhere to be found. I drove home, exhausted, only to find a black envelope taped to my door. Inside, a note: "You made your move. I'll make mine." Some roots run deep. Tucked in the envelope was a photo of me in my living room, taken from inside my house. I scanned the room, heart pounding. The smoke detector, the lamp, the clock, nothing looked off. Then I saw it. A tiny lens, no bigger than a dime, embedded in the base of my curtain rod. I ripped it out and crushed it under my boot. Lillian was still watching, still playing her game, but she was running out of moves. The arrest hit the news like a wildfire. By morning, headlines screamed about a suburban conspiracy and HOA tyranny. A local TV chopper buzzed overhead as I sat on my porch, sipping lukewarm coffee, ignoring calls from reporters and true crime podcasters. The town was waking up. A guy who used to mow his lawn in perfect diagonals was now smashing his HOA-approved mailbox with a sledgehammer, yelling about taking back his life. The dam was breaking, but Lillian wasn't done. I knew she'd try something desperate, so I decided to flush her out. I called a press conference on the steps of City Hall. No podium, no script, just me in my sheriff's jacket, speaking plain. "Your mayor built a surveillance state," I told the crowd. "Cameras in your homes, fake cops on your streets, fines for breathing too loud. Lillian Prescott isn't your protector. She's your warden." Silence, then a single clap. Then more. Then a roar. The town wasn't just angry, they were ready to fight. That night, my power cut out. Not the neighborhood's, just mine. I stepped outside, flashlight in hand, and spotted a sleek black vehicle parked 2 houses down, headlights off. I approached, my service pistol holstered but ready. The door opened, and there she was, Lillian, dressed in black, no trace of her usual pastel polish. Her eyes were sharp, unyielding, like she still thought she could win. "You don't know when to stop, Tom," she said, her voice steady. "You don't know how to lose," I shot back. "You built a cage and called it a community." "It was order," she said, stepping closer. "People need rules, or they spiral. You think you've won? They'll beg for me when the chaos comes." I pointed to the street, where neighbors were gathered, laughing, free for the first time in years. "You've already lost, Lillian. They're not scared anymore." She tilted her head, a faint smile flickering. "They will be. And I won't be here to clean up your mess." Before I could respond, 2 unmarked cruisers pulled up, silent and swift. State troopers stepped out, cuffs in hand. Lillian didn't resist. She just looked at me, her voice low. "You're only sheriff until they say otherwise. Remember that." They took her away, the night swallowing the sound of tires on pavement. I stood there, the weight of it all settling in. It wasn't over not yet, but it was close. The taillights of the state troopers' cruisers faded into the night, taking Lillian Prescott with them. I stood on the sidewalk, the cool air biting at my knuckles, her final words looping in my head. "You're only sheriff until they say otherwise." It wasn't just a taunt, it was a warning, and I'd be a fool to ignore it. Lillian had built a machine, and machines don't stop just because you pull the plug. There were still gears turning, loyalists lurking, and a town teetering between freedom and fear. My job wasn't done. By morning, Maple Grove was a different place. The news had spread like wildfire, fueled by grainy cell phone videos of the HOA arrests and my press conference clips looping on every local channel. Reporters camped outside City Hall, their vans clogging the streets. Social media was a battlefield, half the town cheering the end of the HOA's reign, the other half clutching their pearls, insisting Lillian was a victim of a witch hunt. I stayed off my phone. I had bigger problems than internet arguments. The HOA office was sealed, yellow tape crisscrossing the doors, but the bunker's contents were still being cataloged by the state police. They'd found more than I expected. Encrypted hard drives, dossiers on every resident, even a list of potential agitators with my name at the top. The surveillance feeds were the worst, hundreds of cameras, some in bedrooms, bathrooms, places no one should be watched. The text traced the signals to a private cloud server, wiped clean hours after the raid. Someone was covering tracks, and I had a hunch who. I drove to the station, expecting a quiet day to plan my next move, but the parking lot was a circus. Residents lined up, some with complaints, others with thank yous, a few just wanting to shake my hand. An old man in a flannel shirt pressed a homemade pie into my arms, muttering about how the HOA had fined him for unapproved berry bushes. A young mom, eyes red from crying, told me she'd found a camera in her nursery. The anger was palpable, but so was the relief. For the first time, people felt safe to speak. Inside, my desk was buried under paperwork, incident reports, witness statements, and a stack of letters demanding Lillian's release. One stood out, handwritten in sharp, angry capitals. "You'll regret this, Sheriff. Order will return." No signature, but the Trianscale seal at the bottom was a dead giveaway. Lillian's loyalists weren't just hiding, they were organizing. I called a meeting with the neighborhood guardians. Frank, Ruth, Eddie, Marcus, and the teenagers crammed into my office, pizza boxes and soda cans littering the table. Maggie joined us, looking less haunted now that the truth was out. "We've got momentum," I said, spreading a map of Maple Grove on the desk. "But Lillian's people are still out there. We need to root them out before they regroup." Eddie, fiddling with a drone remote, spoke up. "I've been monitoring their old comms. Someone's still using the encrypted channels, sending coded messages about Phase 2. "Phase 2? Ruth asked, adjusting her glasses. "They're not planning a bake sale, are they?" "More like a comeback," Maggie said. The Midnight Plans file mentioned a contingency restructuring the HOA under a new name, new faces, same control. Marcus leaned back, arms crossed. "So we hit them first. Make it impossible for them to rebuild." Frank grinned, cracking his knuckles. "I say we burn their playbook. Publicly." The plan came together fast. We'd stage a town-wide event, a celebration of the HOA's end, but use it as cover to flush out the loyalists. Ruth suggested a Freedom Fest in the community square, music, food, and a symbolic shredding of the HOA rulebook. Eddie would monitor the comms for any chatter. Marcus and the teens would keep eyes on the crowd, looking for familiar faces from the bunker raids. Frank and I would be ready to move if anyone took the bait. Freedom Fest kicked off at noon on Saturday. The square was packed, kids on bikes, families with picnic blankets, old-timers swapping stories about HOA fines. A local band played covers of Springsteen and Tom Petty, the speakers drowning out the occasional heckler shouting about law and order. Ruth emceed, her voice booming as she invited residents to toss their HOA citations into a shredder. The crowd cheered with every rip, the air thick with defiance. I stood near the stage, scanning for trouble. Eddie, perched on a bench with his laptop, gave me a thumbs up. "Got something," he whispered through my earpiece. 3 signals pinging from the east side of the square. "They're using the old HOA frequencies." I nodded to Frank, who slipped into the crowd with Marcus. The teens fanned out, their phones recording everything. Then I saw her, Clara Vaughn, the HOA board member from the missing persons report, standing near a food truck, talking into a radio. She wasn't alone. 2 men in plain clothes, both from the bunker arrests, lingered nearby, their eyes darting like they were waiting for a signal. I moved closer, keeping my distance, when Ruth's voice cut through the noise. "And now, a special announcement from Sheriff Hargrove." That wasn't part of the plan, but I rolled with it. I took the mic, the crowd quieting. "Maple Grove," I said, my voice steady. "You've been lied to. Your homes were watched, your lives controlled, by people who thought they were above the law. We stopped them, but some are still here, plotting to bring it back." I paused, locking eyes with Clara. "If you're one of them, know this, we're watching you now." The crowd erupted, but Clara didn't flinch. She whispered something into her radio and slipped toward an alley. Frank and Marcus were already moving, cutting her off. I jumped off the stage, weaving through the crowd. By the time I reached the alley, Frank had Clara's radio, and Marcus was holding one of her goons by the collar. The second guy had bolted, but Eddie's drone was tailing him. "Who's giving the orders?" I demanded, staring down Clara. She smirked, unfazed. You think this ends with Lillian? She was just the face. The system's bigger than one person. Keep talking, I said, stepping closer. Or you'll be explaining it in a cell. She clammed up, but the radio crackled, a distorted voice spitting out, abort phase 2. Regroup at secondary. Eddie traced the signal to a warehouse on the edge of town, one listed as storage in the HOA's expense reports. I called in the state troopers, and we hit the place before sundown. The warehouse was a fortress, steel doors, no windows, and a security system that screamed money. Inside, we found a command center, monitors, radios, even a stack of new HOA rulebooks branded Maple Grove Unity Council. 3 loyalists were caught shredding documents, their faces pale as we cuffed them. The evidence was overwhelming plans to relaunch the HOA under a new name, funded by offshore accounts tied to Lillian's allies. But one thing was missing, a leader. Clara's words echoed in my mind. The system's bigger than one person. Back at the station, I sifted through the warehouse hall. A single memo, half-burned, mentioned a council of order, a group of unnamed players who'd backed Lillian's operation. No names, no faces, just a promise to restore control. I leaned back in my chair, exhausted but wired. We'd dismantled the HOA, arrested its foot soldiers, and exposed its lies. But the roots Clara mentioned were still there, buried deep. Freedom Fest continued into the night, the square glowing with string lights and laughter. I joined the crowd, shaking hands, accepting hugs, even signing a kid's toy sheriff badge. Ruth handed me a beer, her eyes twinkling. You did good, Tom. They're calling you a hero. Not yet, I said, scanning the horizon. Not until it's really over. That night, I found another envelope on my porch. No note, just a USB drive. Against every instinct, I plugged it into a spare laptop. A video loaded, grainy, low-lit, showing a conference room. 5 figures sat around a table, their faces blurred. One stood, gesturing to a slide. Maple Grove Recovery Plan, Phase 3. The timestamp was yesterday. My blood ran cold. They weren't just regrouping, they were evolving. The grainy video on the USB drive played on a loop in my mind as I sat in my office, the station quiet except for the hum of the vending machine down the hall. 5 shadowed figures, a slide titled Maple Grove Recovery Plan, Phase 3, and a timestamp that mocked my victory yesterday. I'd thought we'd won, that Lillian's arrest and the HOA's collapse had freed Maple Grove. But Clara's words in the alley were true. The system's bigger than one person. Lillian was the face, but the machine she'd built had deeper roots, and they were already sprouting again. I didn't sleep. Instead, I called the neighborhood guardians for an emergency meeting at Maggie's house. The living room, still littered with maps and empty coffee cups from our war room days, felt heavier now. Frank paced, his fists clenched. Ruth sorted through printouts of the warehouse documents. Eddie hunched over his laptop, trying to trace the USB's origin. Marcus cleaned a wrench like it was a weapon, and the teenagers, usually all smirks and sarcasm, sat silent, sensing the shift. Maggie broke the tension, setting a plate of cookies on the table. We've been here before, she said. We'll do it again. Not the same, I said, rubbing my eyes. This Phase 3's not just a rebrand. They're planning something bigger, and we don't know who's pulling the strings. I played the video on Maggie's TV, the blurred faces taunting us. The leader's voice, distorted but deliberate, outlined restructuring community governance and neutralizing opposition. My name came up twice. Eddie looked up from his screen. The USB was Cliano metadata, no fingerprints. But I cross-referenced the warehouse docs. That council of order they mentioned? It's not just local. There's chatter about funding from out-of-state LLCs, shell companies tied to real estate developers. Developers? Ruth asked, her brow furrowing. What do they want with our lawns? Control, Maggie said. Maple Grove's property values skyrocketed under Lillian's rules. If they can replicate her model surveillance, compliance, fear they can turn whole towns into cash machines. We're just the prototype. Frank slammed a fist on the table. Then we crush it. Now, before they spread. I nodded, but my gut twisted. This wasn't just about Maple Grove anymore. It was about power, money, and a vision of control that could infect every suburb in the country. We needed to end it here, decisively. and that meant finding the Council of Order. I turned to Eddie. Can you trace those LLCs? Get us a name, a location, anything? It'll take time, he said, fingers flying across his keyboard. But I've got to lead a meeting scheduled tomorrow night, some fancy hotel in the city. The comms mentioned Maple Grove delegates. That's our shot, I said. We go in, record everything, and expose them to the world. No more shadows. The plan was risky, but clear. Eddie and the teens would hack the hotel's security feeds to get us eyes inside. Marcus would rig a distraction, something loud, non-lethal, to scatter the council's muscle. Ruth and Maggie would blend in as staff, planting mics and cameras. Frank and I would confront the delegates, badges out, and force them to talk. If we could get proof of their scheme, I'd have enough to call in the feds. But we had to move fast, and we had to be flawless. The next evening, we rolled into the city, a ragtag convoy of my cruiser, Frank's beat-up pickup, and Marcus's van. The hotel was a glass tower, all chrome and pretension, the kind of place where power hid behind $20 cocktails. Ruth and Maggie slipped in first, dressed as catering staff, their hidden mics feeding to Eddie's laptop in the van. The teens, posing as valets, loitered near the entrance, ready to signal trouble. Frank and I waited in a service hallway, my heart pounding like it did back in my rookie days. Eddie's voice crackled in my earpiece. Got the feed. Third floor, conference room 3B. 5 suits, 2 security goons, and wait, one of them's Clara Vaughn. My jaw tightened. Clara, the HOA board member we'd nabbed at Freedom Fest, was out on bail and already back in the game. They're starting, Eddie said. Something about expanding the Maple Grove model. Marcus's distraction hit right on Quia's smoke bomb in the lobby, harmless but chaotic, sending guests scrambling. The security goons bolted, leaving the conference room exposed. Frank and I moved, badges out, and burst through the door. Clara froze mid-sentence, a projector slide behind her reading Phase 3, National Rollout. The other 4-3 men and a woman, all in tailored suits, stared like deer in headlights. Sheriff Tom Hargrove, Clark County, I said, my voice cutting through the silence. You're done. This ends tonight. Clara recovered first, her smirk returning. You're out of your depth, Sheriff. You think this is just us? We're a pilot program. There are dozens of towns like yours, ready to fall in line. Then you'll fall first, Frank growled, stepping forward. One of the suits, a silver-haired man with a politician's smile, raised a hand. Let's not escalate. We're just investors, ensuring community stability. Surely you understand the need for order. Order, I snapped, pointing to the slide. You mean cameras in bedrooms, fake cops with zip ties, and fines for breathing wrong. That's not stability. That's tyranny. Ruth's voice whispered in my earpiece. Mics are live. Everything's streaming to the cloud and the prosecutor's office. I gave a slight nod, keeping my eyes on Clara. Keep talking, Clara. Tell us who's bankrolling this. Who's the Council of Order? She laughed, cold and sharp. You'll never touch them. They're untouchable senators, CEOs, people you'd never suspect. Maple Grove was just a test. You've delayed us, but you can't stop progress. Watch me, I said, stepping closer. You're under arrest for conspiracy, extortion, and about a dozen other charges I'll figure out later. Frank moved to cuff her, but the silver-haired man lunged for a briefcase, pulling a flash drive. Before he could smash it, Marcus burst in, wrench in hand, and pinned him to the wall. The teens swarmed the room, grabbing laptops and phones, their cameras rolling. The state troopers arrived minutes later, tipped off by Ruth's stream. They cuffed the delegates, seizing everything: documents, drives, even a ledger listing partner towns across 5 states. Clara stayed silent, her smirk gone. The silver-haired man, who turned out to be a real estate mogul named Victor Lang, sang like a canary, spilling names and deals to save his skin. The Council of Order wasn't just a local cabal, it was a network, and we'd just ripped open its heart. Back in Maple Grove, the fallout was seismic. The hotel raid dominated national news, with pundits debating suburban surveillance and HOA dystopias. The feds took over, dismantling the council's network, arresting developers, lobbyists, and even a congressman tied to the LLCs. Maple Grove became a symbol, a warning of what happens when power festers unchecked. The town voted to dissolve the HOA for good, replacing it with a simple neighborhood council led by Maggie. New rules were bare bones. No fires, no livestock in garages, and absolutely no hidden cameras. Freedom Fest became an annual tradition, a middle finger to the old regime. Kids painted gnomes, adults grilled whatever they wanted, and the square pulsed with music and laughter. I got a plaque from the town, which I hung in my office next to a photo of the Guardians, all of us grinning like we'd won the lottery. Frank's rib joint doubled its business. Ruth started a community newspaper, and Eddie's drones became a local attraction, buzzing over festivals with banners of hope. But I didn't relax completely. Late at night, I'd still drive the streets, watching for those telltale signs: a golf cart without plates, a van idling too long. The system was dead, but systems have a way of creeping back. One evening, as I locked up the station, a final envelope appeared under the door. Inside was a single note. Well played, Sheriff. Stay vigilant. No seal, no signature, just a faint whiff of Lillian's perfume. I burned it in my backyard, the ashes scattering in the wind. Maple Grove was free, truly free, and I'd made sure it would stay that way. The council was gone, their plans in ruins, and the town had learned its lesson. Power belongs to the people, not a clipboard or a camera. I wasn't just a sheriff anymore, I was a guardian, and I'd fight for this place as long as I had a badge. The story of Maple Grove is over, but its echoes linger. It's a tale of power abused, of ordinary people pushed to their breaking point, and of a community that fought back. I hope it left you thinking about the lines between order and oppression, about the courage it takes to stand up, and about the violence, subtle or overt, that festers when justice falters. Now, I want to hear from you. In the comments below, share your thoughts. Was the HOA's control a necessary evil or pure tyranny? Would you have fought like the Guardians or tried to work within the system? What does this story say about the injustices you've seen in your own life, whether it's a bully in a boardroom or a rule that suffocates freedom? Take a stand, speak your truth, and let's keep this conversation alive. Maple Grove taught us one thing: when we stay silent, the shadows win.